Hello and good evening to all of you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us for the first AGM that the Nottingham Forest Supporters Trust has had since we've been in the Premier League. So I'd like to say that we were obviously influential in helping get us there, but perhaps that was more to do with Steve Cooper and some lads wearing red shirts. But seriously, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's trite to say it sometimes, but it is the case that it's the members of organisations like ours that make us valid and give us a voice with the club. The reason we're listened to is because of people like you, people who've come along to our AGM tonight. A couple of bits of housekeeping from me. I'm going to start, as you'll already have seen, I'll be going through a few points on the agenda and then passing over to my colleagues. We have two votes tonight, and they're important because they're a legal requirement for a body like ourselves. They will be covered by my colleague Nigel Langrick, who's our treasurer, when we'll be voting to pass the accounts, and then Paul Severn will be talking to you about the election we had recently, and because there wasn't a vote, because we didn't have enough people standing, as we'll come to that later, that also needs to be approved by the AGM. One more point before I get on with it. I'd like to welcome Thomas from the FSA, Thomas Concannon. He will be talking to you later about the role of the FSA and his specific role within that. He'll also be taking questions from you towards the end of the meeting, as I'll be doing myself. Okay, so on with the bits I want to talk about. And the first of those is, you might not be surprised to hear, the relationship with the club. It's what the Supporters Trust tries to do, is to give you and the rest of our members a voice with our club. And so I just want to comment upon that. And being quite honest with you, the relationship with the club isn't as fulsome as it has been. Not any negative reasons for that, it's positive reasons. The fact we're in the Premier League has meant that there's a great deal more demand on people at the club. And for that reason, we're not meeting with them as regularly as we were. Having said that, we were meeting with them on very regular occasions. We're meant to meet them at least twice a year. The last time was in July last year. So that's something that the club are aware of. We have got an agreement with them to meet again soon and to do another Q&A. The date of that and the exact nature of it has yet to be agreed, but we do have a firm agreement from them to do a Q&A, which will be on camera, like the last one was. So, as I say, not huge concern from us there. There's been quite a bit of staff turnover at Forest, as some of you will be aware of, and it's the case at the moment that the relationship with the club is largely through Nick Randall, as has been the case in the past. There is a fan liaison officer appointed now as well. He's relatively new in the role. So we have positive relationships with the club, but there has been some concern. You need to go back, whoever's changing the slides, the chair report needs to go back. I think it was the second or third slide in. It's not absolutely essential. I can go through the rest of these points without it. I'll just touch upon the Q&A, because those of you who haven't seen it might want to visit our website and have a look, because on the Q&A, it was very extensive. It was sort of 3,000 or 4,000 words of responses to some very detailed questions we asked on your behalf to the club. It covers stadium redevelopment, ticketing and home memberships, away memberships. These are all things that happened in the past, of course, but financial implications of the Premier League, fan dialogue and environmental sustainability. Clearly things will have moved on, and we'll be covering some of those points again next time we talk to them. The next point I want to cover is the website and the database. We have a pretty stable membership at something in the region of 700, 750 people. And that's less than we had during the Fowers era when the trust was set up. And that's pretty common for when you have an existential threat relating to the club. People tend to be very interested, and then it drops off a bit. According to the FSA, our numbers are pretty healthy and compare well to clubs of a similar size to ourselves. We have a much improved database, which we've spent a substantial amount of money on by our standards, but that means that we can track our members much better and email those members who have lapsed and perhaps didn't want to. And we've also totally rebuilt our website using Nottingham-based companies in all these cases. Some of you might have seen our profile in the media increasing pretty substantially compared to how it used to be. That comes around from increased interest, of course, in the Premier League. So we've had quite a bit of coverage, both national and local. We featured on the Today programme the day after our promotion. So 5 or 6 million people listened to me drone on a little bit about Nottingham Forest on the Today programme, which was a bit spooky. A call at Wembley Park immediately after the match. And of course, my phone's running down with all the messaging and everything that me and all you guys were doing. And fella said, oh, hi, Andy, it's such and such from the Today programme. Can you be on the radio tomorrow morning at 7:25? So it was as well I was driving back and not drinking. But anyway, so that was good. Sky Sports, we've been on TalkSport, we've been in the Times, been in the I newspaper and others. So it's sort of nice because it's reflected interest in our club. And of course, with us being in the Premier League, it's to be expected. We've tried to represent your voice quite well as best we can. We have a substantially increased social media following as well. It's an important channel for us to communicate to you and other fans. We have something like 11,000 members now on Twitter, followers, sorry, on Twitter. We've got a lot going on Facebook and on Instagram. Most of us too old to understand TikTok, so not a lot on there at the moment. But if anybody knows how to run TikTok, come and talk to us about it and help us out. A couple more things to cover before I pass on. That's the Supporters Trust work in the community. We're very proud of the work we did in helping raise the profile of our own role, and that's Nottingham Forest's role, our involvement in the Hillsborough disaster, but also showing respect to the people at Liverpool. So we laid a wreath at Anfield, which was extremely well received by the Spirits of the Shankly, which is their Supporters Trust, but much more widely amongst the Liverpool community. I believe the video that was put out was watched by many hundreds of thousands of people, and we got a lot of positive back. We were closely involved with the club with regard to that wonderful tribute that Forest themselves came up with, but with our contribution and discussion with them about the 97 seats that were covered in our game in the FA Cup. So we're pleased with our involvement there. Our sponsorship of the food bank collections is important to us, and through us and the charity You Do That Hope, you guys and our fellow fans have contributed food and money to contribute to in excess of 10,000 meals now. So that's important. We'll continue to do that. And we've also recently increased our engagement with the Community Trust as well. That work is ongoing, so not a lot to report about that right now. Two final things. First is our areas of sponsorship and donations. We, as some of you might know, sponsor the women's team captain, Lindsay Harkin. We sponsor her shirt. And we've also, recognising Forest's own sponsorship of UNHCR on the shirts, we've made a donation to the UNHCR as well. Our final point is to talk about our own capacity. We're a small organisation. We've had some capacity issues in these last months because of ill health of some of my colleagues on the board. But we've built a great deal in this Supporters Trust over the 5 years or so we've been running. And we got to the stage whereby we really need to look to succession. Those of you who've been members of the Supporters Trust from the beginning will have seen my face right from the beginning. And I haven't been the chair all that time, but I have been involved. And it's time for fresh blood. It's time for new people to come in and to shape our future. Now, I'm not leaving yet, but I have 2 years left on my current role. In my view, it'd be good to see somebody else's face helping run the trust. Same goes for some of my colleagues. Not everybody will be stepping down, but some will be. And so we really do need more. And so that's an important part for us to be, an important thing for us to be running the next year or two. And that is making sure that we have good succession. So that's it. Thank you for listening from me. Can I pass on to next person? Bob, I think that's you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for giving up your time to attend tonight. Just a little bit of introduction on the secretarial role. The Trust have followed best practice in that as the Secretary of the Trust, I'm not a board member, and my key area of responsibility is governance. So I'll refer mainly to that. And of course, good governance is really important. We need a good structure, constitution and good rules. We also need good people with the skills and the commitment on the board. We also, as a trust, need a good membership, and Andy's explained that we've got currently more than 700 members, and in due course you'll see the accounts, and we need to make sure we are financially viable, and you'll see that we're in a healthy position there. Every AGM, I see it as an opportunity to look back. How did we do since the last AGM a year ago? It's also an opportunity to look forward. What do we need to address and what will change? So if we just look back from when we met a year ago, we all know that we've now become a member of the Premier League. And that means for the club, it's very, very different. First time in there for 23 years. And of course, it means that our relationship with the club has been impacted, as Andy suggested, because the club have had to gear up to being a member of the Premier League. So what did we achieve in the last year? Well, we focused on infrastructure as a key requirement, and that's gone very well. I'm indebted particularly to Paul for his work on that. It's around IT systems. A lot of work's gone on about membership, and we've now got a much more reliable IT infrastructure to move forward. So that is a big achievement that we wanted to happen. Still a bit more work to do because you've always got to stay ahead of the game. The other thing that we've done in the past year is we are very active within the FSA, the Football Supporters Association. It's great that we've got Thomas on to talk about that. He leads the Premier League network, of which we are a member. We're also a member, an active member of the Women's Football Network as well, which only came into being very recently in the last couple of years and has made a lot of progress that we've contributed to. So there's some of the achievements from last year. We didn't manage to get on with everything we wanted to do. And for the future, Andy's already referred to our capacity as a trust, particularly at board level. So that is a key issue for us, and I encourage anyone who feels they can contribute to get in touch with the trust, because we definitely need greater capacity, more pairs of hands. It's really important. Everyone's got differing skills, and it means as well that we can distribute the workload rather wider. And in doing so, our focus has to be on meeting our governance requirements, and the bit that gets missed that can't be easily addressed is the service to our members. Now we've got the right infrastructure, IT infrastructure, we want to engage with our members even better than we already do. So we are ambitious as a trust, but we have to be realistic. We can only, there's no point us trying to set our ambitious plans that can't be delivered. It's fair to say that after 2 years of challenge with COVID, 2022's introduced further challenges to us. A couple of board members have had absence through quite significant ill health. And that's simply transferred a lot of pressure back onto those who have been the remaining members of the board. In terms of our input with FSA, we've been very, very active regarding the fan-led review. We need to remember, of course, that essentially we now appear to have two reviews, one for the men's game and one for the women's game. They seem to be taking a slightly divergent approach. In recent days, there's been a lot of publicity about the role of an independent regulator, and I'm sure that Thomas will pick that up in due course. As a trust, we've supported that initiative, and we've also supported the key ambitions of better distribution of resources in football. And also, of course, we've got a keen interest in the role of trusts and indeed supporter groups. And I'm sure that if the white paper does emerge, as is expected in the next week or two, we shall see more on that. Because what is clear is that we do need to make sure that fan engagement is there in a meaningful way with clubs, and is referred to our relationship with our club. And it's pretty good. We need to, with all the changes that they've had, make sure we get back on a more even keel with that. But when we compare with other clubs, there are many clubs that have got real challenges in terms of their relationship with their clubs. And we are far, far away from that. But of course, we need to make sure that whatever changes come through from the fan-led review, that we can play a full part both nationally and locally with our club. So our priorities are about service to members, links with the football club, working with the FSA, and also reviewing our own trust strategy. We made a start on that in the past year, but because of absences from the board, we need to pick that up. One thing I also want to refer to is that I've seen the real spirit of football in recent months. A lot of you will be aware of a supporter suffering cardiac arrest at the Amex Stadium back in October. I was that supporter who was involved, and I received incredible support from the local club at Brighton and their affiliate bodies, such as St John's, etc. And it's only because of them that I survived. And because of that, I've been working with our board on some initial plans whereby I want to lead on a number of initiatives to develop CPR training and defibrillators. Already talked with the FSA, who are very keen to be involved. St John's are very keen to be involved. We've already had a lot of publicity from it. There will be a programme on the BBC in the next 3 months featuring that event. And there are developments with other organisations as well. The good thing is that it's very rare to get an active live film of this event. That was possible, and that film's been made available to many clubs and many health bodies. And there's been a real reaction from the health industry. I won't say much more on that now, but I'm very keen that our trust push this, not just for our area, but actually on a national basis. And therefore other people can benefit in the way that I benefited back in October. So I think that brings my presentation to a conclusion. Remember, if you've got any issues away from an AGM, you can contact us with any questions, queries, through our website. So I think I've said enough at that point, and I'll hand over.
Yeah, so now on to my treasurer's report, which is the, just talking through the accounts, the financial position of the trust, what running the trust has cost us in the past 12 months, and how the finances look going forward, and the position that we're in to remain a good body for supporters, especially the relationships that we're developing with the club, and sort of keep us relevant and give us the ability, if ever needed in the future, to maybe step in and bring in some outside help if we're ever in a position that we hope the club isn't in. So first of all, as Andy mentioned, we stand at around 750 members at the moment. That's a slight drop on last year, but that number's been fairly constant for 3 or 4 years now. I think that's kind of the base of the trust. We started off at well over 1,000. As Andy mentioned, that was in much darker times. So the 750 number of members is something that we're pretty comfortable with, and we think is fair for a club of our size. You'll see that there's some other donations that we received this year. That's not actually direct donations into the trust. That's previous year's costs that we'd sort of incurred, some professional help that we'd needed a few years ago. We'd asked for it to be billed a number of times, and ultimately it's been decided on that the person involved was happy to just donate their professional expertise. So we've written what was owed out of the trust off to bring it into our sort of reserves going forward. Generally, most of the costs of the day-to-day run of the trust stay the same, and we've last year was significantly lower because it was sort of during COVID. So that 1,700 that you see as a total for last year's costs was lower than usual. We've normally sort of stuck around maybe 3,000 to 4,000. But this year you'll see that it's jumped up and had quite a significant jump. And as we've sort of heard from Andy and from Bob, that's because we've had to put a lot of time and effort and had to take on professional help to update our website and our management of our members to make sure that we can continue to get emails out to you in a good fashion that looks professional, and be able to stay on top of all of the data that we hold for people and make sure that fits in with the GDPR landscape that we now live in. And then the AGM expenses, we didn't have any of those last year, again due to COVID. We used to have them for some of you who've been members for a longer period of time, when we used to do the AGMs at the Ice Centre. We've now moved to doing that online. That obviously incurs a cost for us to be able to put this on and make sure that it's all run professionally and smoothly in a way through Zoom that you can interact with us, but we can also, present in a professional way. You'll see on the right-hand side of your screen that the assets of the trust stand at £27,000, which we believe is healthy and it's a good position for us to be in. It means that if there are any specific projects in the next few years that we feel we need to take on, we have the ability to do so, not just relying on the income of that 1 year, but also it's kind of a fighting fund, as I mentioned before. If we ever get to the point where something negative happens around the club and we need to bring in some outside help, we've got that ability to sort of offer something or have a starting position rather than start from zero, which ultimately is where we were when we started the trust in the Fawaz era. And there was no sort of certainty then as if an organisation like us may need to get involved at some point. So that remains there as something that we can fall back on if ever needed. So, I think we are doing a Q&A session at the end, which anyone can obviously ask any specific questions. But in the meantime, if we're all sort of happy as members that the accounts are fair and they don't offer anything that anyone's sort of too worried about, if everyone could just do what Andy said earlier and just raise a hand at the bottom of your screen just to say that we accept those, then we can sort of take that as a vote that these are okay, and I can get this submitted to the FCA. I think I've got a number of people. Yeah, most attendees are now showing the raised hand. Yeah, I think we can take that motion as passed, and I will pass back on.
Each year, the trust must run a democratic election process. Obviously, a democratic body, and any member has the option to stand for election and join our board. for the last 2 years, it's been overseen as it needs to be by an independent election officer, and this is Neil Lemillier from Exeter City Trust, and he's overseen the process and is an expert on elections of this type, and ensures that we follow our own rules. Determine that there is a board of between 6 and 10 members. However, a third of these can be co-opted. During the course of the last year, Lindsay Knott stepped down from the board. She's now involved with the Disabled Supporters Association, which sort of grew out of some of the work that she was involved with in the trust. And this has actually left us with just 3 elected members, and the remaining spots were made up by co-optees. So what that meant was we had actually 7 potential spaces available. So the election process ran in December, and the good news is that we can announce that Simon and Asif have joined the board through that election process. They were the ones that stood and filled in the various forms and then got the nominees. But it does mean that there were fewer nominees than available places. So that means that upon a vote at this AGM, which we'll have in a moment, they are automatically elected to the board. Both of them wrote great statements and bring real skills and experience and credentials to the board. So really great to have them on board. Just some further points to make. The diversity of the board is really important, and it's important that we have female members as well. And the good news is that there are several people who are interested in joining either on a more informal level or co-opted, and the plan is to offer at least 1 co-opted spot to a woman who's interested, and that should be happening in the next few weeks. And there are various people who for whatever reason weren't able to get round to standing in the process, but are still interested. So hopefully that will help as we relaunch with our new board and start to make plans for 2023. One issue that seems to crop up that stops people from standing and going through that process is the 2 nominations that you need. Everyone needs 2 from the trust, and if you do need, if you're interested in standing in the 2023 election, do let us know, because we can introduce you to people over the course of the year, and you can share your skills and credentials with them, and then they can potentially act as nominees. So just something to bear in mind ahead of the game if you're interested in standing in the future. Andy's outlined the succession planning that we need to do over the next 2 years. There's several people in the same position as Andy with 2 years left, but we are aware that we need to get things ready to pass forward in due course, and we're certainly going to help with that. And the plan really for next year is to try to grow membership, and hopefully the extra capacity will allow us to promote the election more widely, potentially to new members as well. But as Bob mentioned, capacity has been really, really low, and running a proper election and a proper AGM takes a lot of work and time. So that hopefully in the future we'll have a competitive election, because that's a sign ultimately of a healthy organisation. Any questions on that we can cover at the end on any of the points, but we do need to have a confirmation vote that Simon and Asif join the board following the election process. So if you could just raise a hand as before to say that you're happy for them to join, that would be great. Okay, that's the election report. You may remember that one of our major campaigns and probably most successful campaign was My City, My Shirt. So this was a diversity and inclusion campaign where volunteers were photographed by the club photographer Richie in the latest Forest shirts. This was August last year, where we launched at the council house. It was also on the club and trust social media channels, and we got people from a variety of different backgrounds, different religions, disabilities, different ethnicities, men, women, people from the LGBTQ community as well. And the idea was to show the diversity of the Forest fan base and encourage a more inclusive attendance at games and involvement with the club in the future. Campaign was a really great success, and just want to give a couple of updates on further work that took place. The first was a couple of further exhibitions were launched to the public. The first of these was at Rushcliffe Arena, and the council were involved in that and helped with publicity, and that was in the foyer over Easter. So that was the first exhibition. And then, although it has since closed, Nottingham Castle also were very proactive in having another exhibition of the photos in their premises, and it was great to have them publicly available. And I just wanted to share some of the outcomes of the campaign. Firstly, Asif, who's joined our board, was one of the participants. So great to see that is encouraging people to get more involved. Secondly, we were contacted by Dan Shipman, who is visually impaired, and he was grading, and he got in touch with our colleague Barry to say, Barry who organised the bulk of the campaign. He got in touch with Barry to say that the campaign had inspired him so much that he'd actually gone into a different line of work. He works in education and supporting people with disabilities, and he directly puts it down to his involvement with this campaign. So we're hopefully going to do a bit of an article and story about that. And one of the people he's actually been helping is Jack. Jack has Down syndrome, and it's a small world how they ended up working with each other through Dan's new role. And Jack went with his family to the Nottingham Castle, and they shared various photographs, which we were able to put out on social media of that. And I got in touch with Jack's mum over the weekend and just asked for a bit of an update on how the campaign has helped him, and she replied that
since the campaign, Jack gets recognised a lot more. We have people come up to us at matches and speak to Jack and tell us how good the campaign was. These supporters now speak to Jack on a regular basis. We had people message us saying they have seen Jack's pictures on the big screen at the ground. He enjoyed seeing the exhibition at Nottingham Castle. Steve Cooper is also brilliant with Jack. Each time we get to meet him, he remembers his name and takes time to speak to him and ask him how he's doing. This makes Jack feel very much part of Forest, as other people ask, how does Steve know his name? To Jack, this makes him feel extra special, as he tells people Steve Cooper knows him.
That's a nice little story, and hopefully, that some of these examples will inspire others to get involved support Forest from different backgrounds.
Now we're on to the guest talk. I want to say once again, thank you very much to Thomas for joining. He has an important role at the FSA, and it's very good of him to spend his Monday evening. So Thomas, thank you very much indeed. Do you want to suggest you introduce yourself and let people know a little bit more about your specific role in the FSA? And then the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it. My name's Thomas Concannon. I work at the Football Supporters Association as the Premier League Network Manager. So working with all of the supporter organisations that are in the Premier League. So closely with the likes of the Nottingham Forest Supporters Trust. So like I say, just thank you for inviting me along. So I am, as you might be able to tell from my accent, I'm a Newcastle United fan. I've been part of the Newcastle United Supporters Trust in the past, just until recently. So I've got a bit of experience in this area as well, being involved in a supporter organisation. I'm sure we all hope to be walking down Wembley Way with each other in about just over a month's time as well, which would be nice. So I think one thing that I wanted to say as well, it's good to see Bob. You know, obviously Bob, what happened to you at Brighton was very, very sad, and obviously, you know, the work that we've done together with the FSA as well, and what you've been involved in. It's great to see you back. So at the FSA, the Football Supporters Association, one of the biggest pieces of work for us was the fan-led review, which a lot of the supporter organisations fed into, which was led by Tracy Crouch, the MP, and our Chief Executive, Kevin Miles, sat on the panel of that as well. So a lot of work went into that, where we believe in independent regulation in football, and seeing an overhaul of the way that football is run, so that it protects football clubs and recognises them as the values to their communities is exactly what they are. You know, they are very valuable assets to our communities. They're very, very important to the football supporters, and they need protecting. We've seen far too many people in football, unruly owners who are in it for their own financial benefits, that cause huge problems to football clubs, and we've seen some football clubs go out of business, some big football clubs as well. So we firmly believe in reform, and that's what we are hoping to get very soon with the release of the white paper from the fan-led review, and hopefully the implementation of an independent regulator in football, and also a golden share that would see the likes of supporter organisations such as Nottingham Forest Supporters Trust be given that power, that golden share over things of heritage value, so things that really matter to us as football fans. So you know, the kit colour, the name of the team, the stadium, the badge, you know, things that we really care about, you know, things that we really want to protect as football supporters. Obviously there's a limit as to how much influence football fans will have. You know, I dare say we won't be picking the team every single week, but it's certainly having that involvement in the things that really matter to our football clubs. I think that's really important. That's certainly something that we support. We do have a very, very good relationship with the Premier League. We've worked very closely with them on the implementation of their fan engagement standard. There's slight disagreements from our side of things in terms of the way that it's been implemented from the Premier League. And supports our arguments for independent regulation, but we have worked closely with the Premier League, and we have seen them introduce this fan engagement standard that sees every single Premier League club have to submit a fan engagement plan by the end of February, as to how they intend to operate going forward in communication with their supporters. That will see the introduction of the likes of fan advisory boards, and how they would plan to communicate with the wider supporter base, and also continue the communication that they've had with the likes of Nottingham Forest Supporters Trust, and you know, really take fan engagement to the next level. So we'll be working closely with the Premier League and the likes of clubs and their supporter organisations, and making sure that that's implemented properly, and that the fan engagement side of things really improves. We've seen some clubs where there's pretty severe issues where the fan engagement just is quite poor, but equally there are some clubs that do it really, really well, and we want to support that, and we want to, you know, encourage the best practice, and that's certainly something that we'll be keeping an eye over as we go forward, to just try and get that best practice across the board in the Premier League. I think from a personal point of view, it's great to see Nottingham Forest back in the Premier League as well. Massive football club, it really is, and with a huge supporter base. So seeing you back in the Premier League is really encouraging. I think from our point of view as a network, we work together. So there's no sort of rivalries in the network or anything like that. There might be a few jokes here and there, but certainly it's a collective. We do work together on the wider issues that affect football supporters. So on things like broadcasting, fixture scheduling, everyone loves VAR. There's things like that come up on a regular basis as well. Things like we're very big on equality and diversity across the game as well. Fan behaviour, atmosphere, even down to things like cryptocurrency that creeps into football and the discussions around it as well. So there's many things that we work on together, and we regularly have meetings with the Premier League, with broadcasters, just key stakeholders across the game that the likes of the Nottingham Forest Supporters Trust are able to feed into and work together on. So I think from a personal point of view, obviously there's a lot of discussions around how involved people are in supporter organisations, and when things are going well, it's not uncommon for involvement in supporter organisations to dip slightly, because obviously everyone's quite happy. I'm seeing it myself at Newcastle United at the moment, where people are quite happy, so that it doesn't feel like there's the need for supporter organisations to get involved. We tend to be the critical arm of a football club, that critical friend, but there's certainly a need for us. We still have many issues in terms of ticket pricing, ticket allocations at major competitions. For example, that's one of the pieces of work that we worked on, was increasing, for example, the FA Cup final allocation, which was quite small. So we'll just continue to work together. And I think it's really important to stay involved with the supporter organisation. The guys are talking about needing help and wanting to see new faces. Just get involved. Trust me, it's a great thing to be a part of. And with the increase of fan engagement, with the increase of fan involvement in the football clubs, it's a great time to start getting involved in your supporter organisation and support the guys that are currently involved as well, and the new ones coming on board. And I'm sure by working together and building that relationship with your football club, and continue to act professionally and work with other supporters and really build that engagement with your own fan base as well, I think you'll see a marked improvement in the way that your football club engages with you going forward. And we're obviously there to support that as well. The FSA will be there for the likes of the trust and just fans in general. We are a membership-based organisation with over 500,000 members, with almost about 100 fan organisations in the Premier League as well that we work closely with. So the FSA will be there to support. So like I say, just thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to take questions. And like I say, good to see you back in the Premier League. Good to see you picking up some form as well. You pulled away, and I think you'll be all right from a personal point of view. I think you'll be okay. I know the fear is obviously relegation, but I think there's worse teams in the league. I think you'll be fine. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks very much indeed, Thomas. And so Thomas says there are worse teams in the league. That's good enough for me. Thomas, let me tell you something. The first game of the season, our first game in the Premier League for 23 years, I had my ticket to come and get Vertigo up at your place, up in the corner. And my wife, who's a wedding florist, announced that she was doing a wedding that particular day, and she said she might need my help. And I said, couldn't possibly do that. First game back. Anyway, guess where I was? I was at the wedding. She couldn't get anybody else to help us, so we didn't do our best that day. Maybe we'll turn you over when you come down here. But yeah, thanks very much for that. It's appreciated. We do feel that we're back where we belong. Of course we feel that, but I think a few clubs are coming to the City Ground and seeing what a febrile atmosphere does. I think we're pretty strong at home. It's a noisy place, especially these days. So yeah, thanks. It's nice to hear from a well-established club like yourselves to welcome us back. Greatly appreciated, and thanks more widely than that for everything that people like you do at the FSA, because You make the voice of the people listening to this call today. The rest of our members, you make us heard more widely, so it's deeply appreciated. Okay, so I'm going to throw the questions out. Now we've had a few. I picked up a few of them on the Q&A at the bottom there, but there was one which came from Simon. Simon, hello Simon, how are you, mate? Nice to and thanks very much for your contribution. And that was to do, if you haven't seen it in the chat at the bottom, in the Q&A at the bottom, that was to do with what our current membership looks like, more detail, how many people are joining, how many people are leaving, and why are they leaving. So, Paul, I think you've got some information on this. You can comment on this in a bit more detail, can't you?
Yeah, so as discussed with in Nigel's report, the numbers have gone down, but there's a lot of context to that. I think the first is what's already been mentioned. If a club's in crisis, people join, form trust groups, and are very, very active. So you do see interest levels drop off somewhat when that crisis kind of averts. But there is much more context than that. Most of it is around payment systems. So when I first inherited this, there still is 2 payment systems that were set up previously, and it basically means that people do need to keep card details up to date, whether it be on PayPal or Stripe, and if they do get out of date, we can no longer take a payment, and then that gets quite difficult. So if you don't pay, obviously you're not a member and you can't vote. So I've got a Nottingham-based agency that's tried to deal with that and do an audit every year, and we actually found that there were a lot of unpaid members, so we have lost some through that. We've tried to invite people and bring them back and nudge them, and we've even tried to have an automated reminder as well where we can, but we will naturally lose people that way through just people not remembering to update payments. So we're continuing to work on that, but that is the core reason behind it. And there are, of course, people who get in touch and resign. The most common reason at the moment is simply cost of living. So people going through direct debits and just deciding that they need to trim things. So that's a common reason. And there are the odd people who perhaps think the board should be doing things in a different way, and that's completely fine. But we are democratic, and if you are interested in taking it in another direction, you can always get involved, stand for election, and do things differently. So that's always worth bearing in mind. So we are quite stable at between 700, 750, and we're not seeing huge falls now. Now that the data is fully audited and our processes have improved.
Thanks very much, Paul. The next question, there's a couple in the chat here, and I'm going to read it out in case you haven't seen it. Daryl Wilson Hemingway. Daryl, thank you very much indeed for your question. Daryl says, it'd be interesting to hear as to what communications, if any, that have been around the instability within the club in terms of the executive management structures and lack of sponsorship, etc. And also whether anything in this area is felt to be of concern. So as I mentioned when I introduced the meeting tonight, I said we haven't met with the club since July formally. Now we've messaged the club. It's usually most of the immediate communication is from me to the club, either on text messages, WhatsApps, or emails to various people, including Nick Randall and others. So this sort of communication or this sort of detail, clearly you can't do that over a text or even on a mobile phone call. It needs to be more formal than that. We have an important role here in this organization in that we need to be asking questions on behalf of you and then reporting back to you as to what was said. And that's what we intend to do around that specific question. Then somebody who's remained anonymous, and that's absolutely fine. Please ask questions anonymously if you wish to do so. He says, regarding away games, I'd love to have a chance to go to one or to a season. My friend and I always used to be able to do that. We've been season ticket holders for over 25 years, and it doesn't seem fair that we don't get any chance of going to any away games now. it seems to be the same people going to away games like an exclusive club. Has that been considered at all? Yeah, very, very good questions, and they're valid. And we will definitely be going back to the club once again to raise these and other questions. As you can imagine, there's people like I do have an away membership, but I didn't go to 80% of games last season, so I'm not in the 400 club, and so I've missed out on a few occasions this season. Sometimes because I forgot to join the queue early enough. Like Man City, for example, I joined that queue at 10:10, and obviously everything had gone at that time. But the people who can't work, people can't get in front of a computer at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's not really fair for them. There are a number of issues around attendance at away games that we need to raise. And really what we are hoping for from the club is that they listen carefully and that we're not an outlier in any way. You recognise, obviously, there's a lot more demand on our club at the moment. A lot more people want to go. You understand that. I welcome it myself. I think it's great. But there will always be some disadvantage. We have come up, or we've suggested ideas to the club in the past as to how people like yourself, whoever's asked that question, could be looked after with, even if it's just a small number of tickets available to those who haven't been before available. Beyond that, I don't know, but we will once again ask those questions. What we'll do, just to remind you, before we meet with the club next time, is we will be putting out through our various channels, through email and on social media, that we're meeting. Please do ask questions. When we've done this in the past, it's not for us, just because we're on the board of your trust, to go and ask the questions that occur to us. That's not right. It's not appropriate to do that. When we did the Q&A, which some of you are seeing, where I was on the Forest YouTube channel, every single question, bar the ones on finance, I'll come to that in a moment, but every single question wasn't from me, it was from you. It's from our members. I asked them on your behalf, and that's how it should be. On finance, we did ask, or I asked those because the club's accounts are being published between the time that we sent out asking for questions and the time the Q&A was held. So there was some that I asked around there. But again, much, much more healthy if I can, if we, can be asking questions on your behalf. Okay. Oh, Jane, sorry, I've just seen your message on there. That it wasn't meant to be anonymous, although you'd have been welcome for it to be. Jane has said the question was from her, Jane Silverwood. Okay. So any further questions to anyone? I'm going to have a question of Thomas myself in a minute, if anybody else. Oh, we've got some hands raised. Paul, over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question of Thomas. So just to share some of the experiences in recent years with Newcastle, because I understand you're also involved, you've been involved with Newcastle Supporters Trust, and how that's gone, and just to provide some context of how interest levels and impact has been made at another club.
Yeah, not a problem. So I was I was on the Newcastle United Supporters Trust from 2019 onwards. Up until recently, we had our AGM at the start of this month, at which point I stood down because of my new role at the FSA. So we were dealing with an owner who just didn't want to talk. There was no communication, very, very little, apart from a few fan forums years ago, but certainly there was no meaningful dialogue with the football club or with the owner. Or with anyone that were making some key decisions. So that was incredibly difficult. It led to tensions probably within the fan base, disagreements over what was the right way to go about things. A lot of protest groups were set up against the owner as well. And then all of a sudden, it's amazing really, is when the takeover went through, it all seemed to just disappear overnight. A lot of people were extremely happy, and the club are now making strides on fan engagement. They've set up a new supporter services department, which we never had. Our supporter liaison officer also had about 3 or 4 other jobs at the time, and one of them was head of media, so it was a slight conflict. So it was certainly a really difficult time, and probably the most testing time to actually be a part of a supporter organisation, because it was it's really difficult. You get some stick, you take a little bit of abuse online, which is, more often than not completely unjustified, especially when you all want the same things, really. I dare say if a lot of the conversations took place in a pub, you would actually find that you agree a hell of a lot on many things, and so it is difficult. It is testing for those people that are on the board, but someone has to do it from your fan base, and fair play to the ones that always put the I hate this phrase, but the head above the parapet, and really sort of try and represent the fan base as much as they possibly can, because the supporters deserve to be represented, and that was one thing that we always found very, very difficult in Newcastle, especially when we made no inroads on dialogue with the football club. But certainly, though, things are improving, and hopefully the fact that with the stuff that I was talking about before, that with the fan engagement standard and the potential of independent regulation in football that would potentially oversee a better fan engagement standard, things will improve on that front, and having that united message and things like, and we've discussed this with Paul before, things like surveys and things like that, where you really get the numbers as to what people are thinking, and being able to present that at the football club, it just adds that little bit of credibility. And when the trust is involved in certain discussions on a national level as well, so on the things that affect us nationally, as I was talking about before, again, it just adds that little bit of credibility, and that professionalism, I think, is really important and is going to be needed going forward to make sure that the board is well trained and is well organized and ready to deal with the difficult conversations it might have to have in the future. And I think that's certainly something we learned at Newcastle, and is starting to build. So certainly a difficult time, but we came through it, and we're certainly better off for it now, having had that experience of the way that it should never ever be run, and the supporters are completely locked out of their football club in terms of dialogue. We've come through that now, and hopefully, any issues that Forest might have in the future, that you're able to overcome them by sticking together as a fan base. I think that's really important.
We've got a question here for you again, Thomas, from an anonymous person, saying that he or she would be interested to hear from you about any major initiatives at the Newcastle Supporters Trust, or indeed any other that you're aware of, how they've engaged more supporters and grown their membership. And of course, we're all ears there ourselves.
In terms of Newcastle, when it was sort of looking unlikely that the club would be taken over, the Supporters Trust actually launched a pledge scheme, which was a fundraising scheme to raise some money to potentially in the future, under a new owner, be able to buy a share in the club. Now, very quickly after launching that scheme, then the takeover actually went through, so that the scheme lasted, but we did raise about £200,000 in the space of less than a year, which it was always agreed within the rules of the pledge scheme that money would be donated through member approval to local charities. We ran campaigns. We were, during lockdown, during COVID, we had a lot of difficulties with the football club actually releasing refunds to supporters. We were the last Premier League club to do so. So we put a lot of pressure on publicly through the press. We had a very good relationship with the local media. We put pressure on through the Premier League as well. So we were able to ask the Premier League to have a word with Newcastle. And when we did that, within 2 days, Newcastle announced the refunds. So we saw that as a bit of a success for the organisation, being able to use the connections we have at the FSA. But you've got some other great initiatives around the Premier League, some great work that goes on. I'll use Liverpool as an example, their support organisation, Spirit of Shankly. They've done some unbelievable work representing their supporters after some trouble in Paris at the Champions League final, which we hopefully will receive the report from UEFA very soon. But that's an example of a supporter organisation being able to represent their fans on an international basis as well. So just superb work that really brings the members in. I think that's obviously an aim for an organisation to grow the membership and building that sort of awareness amongst your supporter base that you are there and you are there to help. You are there to represent your fans in front of the football club and in front of key stakeholders within the game as well. So you know, that's one example of some great work. But there really is a lot of clubs do some fantastic initiatives as well. The Leeds United Supporters Trust, for example, had a mural initiative where they were getting hold of some buildings in the centre of Leeds and painting Leeds United, you know, murals on the side of them, just little things like that. So, you know, there's some great work just all the way down to little simple things that can sort of build that spirit around a football club.
Thanks, Thomas. If I can just add at the end of that, this is an area that we'd be really interested in. One of the frustrations for us, having been under capacity for some time now, has been just that I was aware of that mural thing, Thomas, and you know, we thought if we had somebody with sufficient time on our trust board or co-opt to get on with that sort of thing, it'd be great. And we're not trying to grow our membership just for the sake of it, but if we have more members, we've got a bigger voice, and the club will listen to us more. And as it happens, we do have a club who are right from the very beginning for this, you know, current ownership taking over, right from the start. They've been very receptive to us, but we can influence, but we can only do so if we have engaged membership. So, you know, those sorts of initiatives are things we'd be very keen on. We're extremely aware of the fact that we need to deliver value for money to our members, that it's not just a talking shop, that there are real things that we can do which makes a difference to the fans. Bob, did you, I can see your hand's down now, but you did have it up. I wasn't sure whether you wanted to ask a question. Bob, you're on mute, I think, mate.
Yeah, please, if I may. First of all, I thank you to Thomas for the work of the FSA. Very, very impressive, and certainly as someone who's been to some away matches this season, the £30 cap that really arose out of the work of FSA is excellent, really. And of course, for those who are a little bit older, we get an even better prize. So, but the £30 limit, because some of the costs of attending Premier League matches as a home fan can be pretty horrendous. So I thank you on that. Just on engagement, two aspects of engagement. We know that some trusts have been pushing alternative methods of engagement, and some have got very poor engagement. We've got a white paper coming up shortly. Will that address the standards for engagement? So that's the first question. The second aspect of engagement is the relationship with the broadcasters. That is an area where a lot of supporters are very, very frustrated by the late announcements and indeed second and third changes of kick-off times and dates for away matches. Ahead of next season, is there anything that's planned there? And just thirdly, on engagement, I'm very mindful we also represent our women's team. There's been a lot of poor publicity over the past couple of weeks on the women's game. Is there any engagement taking place there as well? So all about engagement, but three different strands.
Yeah, so in terms of the white paper, it may not dive into the specifics around fan engagement, but certainly offer encouraging signs to be able to work on that. That's obviously, you know, who knows, it might actually do so. We're obviously very excited to see the white paper. Certainly from a personal point of view, in terms of my role or other members of staff at the FSA who work very, very in depth on this side of it, who will probably have a better knowledge than me on that. But you know, it's certainly something that we're very excited to see the white paper released and the contents of it. On broadcasting, Christ, as a Newcastle fan, when we do travel the most because of where we are in the country. Broadcasting is a pretty big issue, and it has been a bugbear of mine for years. We had a record of when being selected for Monday Night Football, we were selected away from home 14 times in a row. So that was an issue that we kept trying to raise. But the broadcasting is a major issue. It financially impacts on supporters heavily because of the late rearrangements. As you said, Bob, the rearrangement of games sometimes 2 or 3 times for the purpose of broadcasting. So the broadcasting contract is due to renew in 2025. So discussions and obviously it's already coming out now as to who's potentially going to be within that bidding process. So that's certainly something we as an organisation will look towards potentially having an input on. We do believe we should be able to have an input on things like that, certain things in place that protect supporters, be it a cheaper price or whatever. I'm just, just speaking off the cuff here, just certain ideas that you might be able to have. Cheaper prices of games are ever moved, or flexible rail tickets, little things like this that can have that major impact, and that's certainly something that we'll be trying to feed into. We do have a broadcasting working group as well, so we work closely with supporters and being able to build those relationships with broadcasters like Sky, to put those problems to them. In terms of the women's game, we have obviously the Women's Game Network, which Bob, as you'll know, Deb at the FSA does incredible work, and it's certainly something obviously that is just continuing to grow. We find that the organisation is being involved in a lot of key discussions with key stakeholders again, and that's certainly an area that will just continue to grow as the women's game grows, in popularity. And yeah, okay, sometimes you get negative press here and there, even in the men's game, and that's just some things that you overcome. But we as an organisation are obviously keen to support the women's game as it grows, and keen to support organisations that are set up specifically for the women's team, but equally increasing the involvement of female supporters. Football in England, in terms of the men's game, is certainly probably male dominated. But when we see that through support organisations as well, but we certainly want to increase the involvement of female supporters, and that equality and diversity is a key thing for us as an organisation. So that's certainly something we'll continue to work on in the future as well.
Thanks, Thomas. We have one more question I want to just pick up on. Steve Battlemuch, thanks for your question, Steve. He asks whether members think that we should be saying more, so that's the trust saying more about staff and subcontracted staff being paid the real living wage at Forest. Now, Steve, I'm sure you won't mind my saying that this is something that you've raised with us before, quite rightly, and we have talked to the club about it. I understand from the club that all of the directly contracted staff by Forest are paid the real living wage, and the issue then relates to the subcontract. It is a question we'll raise with the club again. I'm not myself, Paul might know more about this than I do, but I'm not clear whether the club even know themselves, and yes, of course, let's argue they should do, shouldn't they? But I'm not sure that the club knows whether or not the subcontracted staff are paid the real living wage. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. It's an important question. Steve, I'll be honest with you, it's not something that any other members raise with us. It might just be because they're not that aware of it. Yourself, with your the organisation you work with, have raised it, and I think you'd probably find, without naming names on the board, that several people on the board fundamentally agree with the point you're raising. But once again, in this type of organisation, as a board, we can't represent what we think. We have to represent what our members think. And so it's legitimate and right that we raise the question, but as to campaigning with the club, as to them paying them the living wages, that has to be something that comes from our membership, if you like, an instruction from the membership saying that's something they want us to prioritise, and that hasn't come yet. But it's an important question, and Steve, I'll give you my word that we will raise it with the club once again, and we'll report back to the membership as to what their response is.
Can I add something on that? There was a BBC in-depth article on this subject, which is well worth reading on the website, and it outlines which clubs pay it and which don't. There are some that do in the Premier League, and even lower, but then there are some very, very big clubs who don't. Forest are in the sort of the bracket of the Yes staff that are directly employed are Yes, but then the subcontractors may not be. I think the word campaign as well, can many different meanings. So our approach, as we've been involved, is to bring up these sorts of things directly. That's because we're able to do that and discuss with senior people at Forest. It's not our tactic hasn't been to go online and criticize things that we don't agree with aggressively, because we found that it can backfire, and it's backfired for on other occasions. So I think it's also about tactics, and we've certainly raised it a few times. We might want to think about how we do that. There is a time for criticising publicly, especially when an owner won't talk to you at all. But we do need to weigh up whether it can be counterproductive as well in our situation.
Thank you very much. So we have 12 or 13 minutes left of the allocated time. I'm going to just throw it back out there if anybody has any further questions. You might not have seen in the chat, but if you wanted to ask a question on mic, you can do so. You just need to click that button. You can see at the bottom there, the raise hand button, and say if there was anything else you wanted to ask. Whilst you're considering whether you want to do that, whether you want to hear your voice, or whether you just want to type something once again, I would just repeat what we've said here on a number of occasions, that anybody who's watching tonight who feels they could contribute a little bit more, okay, the board elections have been, they're over, so you can't stand for a year or so, but you can still be involved. You can volunteer to be involved, and you'd be most welcome. You can be co-opted if you want to be, but you don't have to be formally co-opted as such. You can still volunteer and help out if you feel you'd like to do so. The more help and support we get from people like you, the more we can do. There is a lot that can be done, as you've heard from Thomas and others, but we can't do it ourselves. Most of us have got jobs, and those of us who haven't still have engaged and busy lives. So it is a case of lots of hands needed. So I'm not seeing any hands raised at the bottom, and nothing else in my, oh, hang on a minute. Steve, thanks, Steve. Ground redevelopment will be a big issue. When will the club pull down the main stand? It's going to be top of the agenda, isn't it, when we next meet with them? We went for a walk yesterday with my wife. We walked across. I live on Musters Road, pretty close to the ground. Actually, about a 10-minute walk away from my seats in the Peter Taylor stand. We walked across the river, not like Brian Clough, we took the suspension bridge, and then walked up the other side. And Rebecca, my wife, who comes with me now, because my other season ticket was with my son Evan, who lives away now, and so Rebecca said, "Where do we sit?" As we walked up the other side of the Trent, and I said, "What do you mean, where do we sit?" He said, "Yeah, which stand do we sit in?" And I said, "Well, you can't see it yet, because it's relatively speaking, of course, those of us who know what the main stand looks like, relatively small stand." And she said, "Well, what do you want to be like?" And I said, "Be like the others, be the same sort of height." So it's a big thing that's going to happen, isn't it? It's a huge thing. And yeah, it's the many issues there. I mean, I'm interested to know when we move to the new stand, when the new stand's built, where do I get to sit? Can I sit with all that, that group of people I sit with at the moment? Not all of whom were friends of mine before we moved there. I've become good friends with a couple of people I sit near to. I'm going to see them socially. So I'd like to know about things like that, in the new stand. How's it all going to happen? There's so many things that need to be covered there. And whether I'll get to see it or not, I don't know, because it'll be 2 years' time. Maybe it might be, who knows, whether I'll be involved with the trust at that point, I don't know. But Steve, it'll be really, really important for the Supporters Trust to retain the current excellent relationship we have with the club. We'll be asking a lot of questions around that. Fan engagement, fan input, fan voice will be, or should be, right at the front of what's going on with the what will be the biggest redevelopment of our ground in probably in any of our lives, those of us around this call. So thanks again for that very important question. Just going to look at the bottom again, nobody raising a hand, so I'm just going to give you a few seconds to think if you want anything else to be raised. You're always welcome, as Bob said earlier, to send messages to us you know, via our email address, comms@nffctrust.org. Happy to chat with anybody, have a Zoom call with anybody, meet with people for coffee. I've done that on a number of occasions in the past. If you want to have a chat off the record about something you think about, please, you know, please be engaged. I'm pretty flexible with my time. I can meet at any time. Happy to do that if you wish. Any of the other panelists like to say anything? Barry, I can see your name up there. Hello, Barry. How are you? Your piece was covered by Paul earlier. I don't know if you want to say anything. Barry's the person on the board who did the brilliant work on My City, My Shirt. Did a lot of work. He and Paul did that. So Barry, you'll be known to some of the people on the call, I think.
Yes, I just can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd just like to say thank you to everyone that helped, and I think it's been a wonderful experience. My only concern currently, of course, is we're trapped in the castle. So hopefully we'll be able to resolve that sooner rather than later.
Just to explain, that means the excellent photographs that were taken by Richie Sumter, the club photographer, were mounted on boards, as you'll have seen, and we had an exhibition at the castle. And as I'm sure everybody on the call knows, the castle is currently suffering some financial difficulties, and we haven't got them back yet. We will eventually. And so Barry, again, thanks very much indeed for the work you've done.
Pleasure. Sorry I couldn't be here sooner, but
that's okay. Barry had another commitment, so
yes, thank you.
No worries. Anybody else want to say anything?
Just to share our email address, if you've got any more questions, comms@nffctrust.org, and we'll also share this on YouTube. So if you missed part of it, we'll send it out by email as soon as we've got it ready.
I'm certain it'll go viral. Daryl says that could be very helpful. I don't know if you see that in the Q&As there. Barry Daryl says that he knows a caretaker at the castle and he can ask the question. So that would be extremely helpful, I think.
Yes, if he could either let me have the details or have a quick word with him, then that would be brilliant. We're not in any hurry to move them anyway, so just some update would be useful.
Grand. Thank you. Okay, so thanks once again to everybody for attending tonight. Deeply appreciated. You know, we're just here by ourselves. It would be particularly encouraging. And so thank you. Let's hope we can turn United over on Wednesday night for those of us who are going, and maybe sort of remain in the match when we go up to Old Trafford in a week's time. A few more points from a few teams, including Newcastle, would be useful as well. We want to be, now that we've achieved where we should be, we want to stay there. And so we want to continue to engage with our club in the Premier League, hopefully. But anyway, thanks once again. And thanks to the guys behind the scenes. Ed, Ella, you've done a marvellous job. Thank you very much indeed for the smooth running of this show. Thanks all. See you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.